Right, so because it's spooky season, we might as well talk about the Conjuring Last Rites. Yes, I know everybody and their grandmother talk about the show when it dropped last month, but yeah, it's spooky season, so and it's still shooting cinema right now. But fortunately for some people, we were able to watch it digitally because yes, it came out digitally. But let's just say a few days later of us recorded this, right? So because the Conjuring has been mentioned, a few times on this show, yeah, we might as well talk about its final entry, Last Rites, right? Ricardo, I know you didn't get a chance to watch this. Do you? Well, you'll explain why. It's kind of obvious, right? But this is where I kind of want you to be a part of the conversation here, right? Because, yeah, without staying too long, we just had to talk about the franchise itself, right? And in this case, I'm going to exclude the spin-offs because as far as I'm concerned, well, the only spin-offs I've seen is Annabelle and Annabelle Creation. I think that Creation is very, very, very good. I actually saw that twice in cinema. Annabelle is terrible, the first one. And as far as the other ones, like, La Llorona and The Nun, I couldn't care for any one of those, even though I was told recently that I should check them out. But I guess I'll do so on my own time, right? But then again, I am not too steeped in the world of the Conjuring to check these things out, right? I more focus on the core franchise, which is the Conjuring itself, right? And yeah, I mean, this film here, Last Rites, will make it the fourth and final, in quotes, entry in the series here, right? But yeah, just to touch on just the franchise as a whole, right? So first one, saw it in 2013. I can't remember, I think it was just a trailer that just had me really intrigued though, you know what I mean? Because I was like a big James Wan fan, right? Like I didn't see Insidious till like it came out on digital. Like I wasn't like keen on seeing every single James Wan film, right? But I think this was around the time when his career was blowing up as far as him being like a horror director goes, right? But there was something about The Conjuring that really like drew me in though, you know what I mean? And I think it just has to do with the sort of 70s, like, supernatural aspect of it. There was something about that sort of roped me in from the jump, right? So yeah, I saw that film in theaters, enjoyed it. It made my toes curl, which is a really, like, solid indication that, yes, the show is doing its thing on me. It's making me feel tense when it needs me to feel tense, So I really enjoyed that film, right? But for me, though, I think that the sequel, as in Conjuring 2, which came out 3 years afterwards, I think is a better film, in my opinion, right? Even back then, I called it like the Evil Dead 2 of the franchise, where it took a film which, I'm not saying that, the first film had a small budget, right? But compared to, to the first one, yeah, the second one had a bigger budget, had a bigger scope. They moved the conceit from, the States to England, and it was just bigger in terms of scope and vision and whatnot, right? I think, like, just stylistically, directing wise, acting wise, like it was just it just improved from what the first film did, right? And I saw that in theaters as well. I enjoyed the hell out of that. And I actually like recapped that film in preparation for Last Rites. Like I actually rewatched all three of, well, the first three, right? And yeah, I honestly think that the second one is the best of these four films. I know there will be the fans who will come and say, no, the first one is the best. Yes, the first one is one of the best. It is one of the best horror films of the 2010s, bar none. But there was something about the second one that really stood out to me. I think again, it's just because it was big in scope, right? The third one, The Devil Made Me Do It. This is where they switched directors now, so it wasn't James Wan anymore. It was Michael Chavez. I think he got his break doing some of the Conjuring universe films, which is kind of interesting. That this is where he kind of carved his name out, right? But yeah, this was like the first film I ever saw from him, right? Unfortunately, I would have to see this in my house because this was during the pandemic, so you have to watch it home, right? And I remember like watching it and liking it for what it was, right? But it didn't really stand out to me as much as I wanted to, right? But I will not go as far as say that it was a massive letdown, even though I know that there will be the diehard fans that would think that that film in particular is like the weakest out of the series. I can't say because I am not too versed in the Conjuring universe, nor am I too attached to the point that I think that there's like an entry that's like the ultimate greatest of all time kind of vibe, right? But yeah, I as I said, I recapped the previous films, right? So in recapping The Devil Made Me Do It, it's okay for what it is. It's set in the 80s this time, so I like that. It has a slightly different feel to it. It being this whole sort of weird mix of courtroom drama, even though they don't do much of courtroom stuff in it. In other words, it was like a change of pace there. Like they wanted to they just wanted to try something different. It wasn't the haunted house stuff anymore that we saw in the first two films, right? But unfortunately, I think that was like the weakness of the film, right? Where yes, I do like the fact that it was trying to do something different, but it just sort of strayed away from the formula that yeah, ultimately it just didn't stick out to me as much as I wanted to, right? It had its fair share of tension and scares, but nothing really that I would truly remember, or stuff that truly unsettled me, right? Compared to the first two films, right? But in no way would I say that it was like this absolute waste of time or whatnot, right? It was just the franchise trying to do something a little bit different, right? That's the best compliment I could give the film, right? And then of course we'll get to Last Rites in a bit, right? But yeah, Ricardo, see that you well, I guess you could answer this first, right? If you saw at least one of the films, but I know in your case, I know there's the reason why people will kind of be, will kind of look down at the franchise as a whole, right? But I will, me and hopefully, Michael could explain why we appreciate the series, even though there is this glaring issue regarding, the franchise itself, right? But yeah, Ricardo, take it away. Your history, if there's any, about the Conjuring.
No, yeah, just I just enjoyed it for what it was. I mean, again, the obvious glaring problem is who it based on. Yeah, the amount of evidence that these two people are scammers, right? They're outright scam artists. But I don't have a big problem with that on its own, unless you have an issue with who getting money and why about these kind of things. And I suppose, but yeah, it's well made films. They're well done for what they are and what they do, and it makes an interesting, like, it other than the MCU, I think it's the second like biggest cinematic universe out there, right? If I understand.
Yeah,
If
I would agree with you on that.
Okay, I don't know.
It's
Like in terms of like just size of movies, the amount of movies, I think it's
the
about as
amount of
much.
film.
Yeah, I
Guess
think
you
so.
could make that argument, but I don't consider the spin-offs to really be part of the Conjuring universe,
Okay,
right?
no
I
problem.
mean, yes, the characters exist in the same universe, but the tone and the style
Right,
of the
right,
film
right,
is completely different. So
right,
I wouldn't necessarily class it as all one big franchise.
right. And then well, the movies obviously, even though you might not like the two who they base off of, yeah, it kind of plays into this whole weird, like, I don't know what to call it, but this kind of mysticism of Catholicism kind of thing. I was like, ooh, Catholic scary kind of bullshit, and like, yeah,
Yeah,
it kind of weird, right? Like,
and
but a lot of
I would say it also draws from the whole satanic panic era of the
but
80s. It's
it
a
is play both ways.
hmm.
It is play both ways because it does a kind of, because United States have a weird relationship with the Catholic Church and a whole back and forth about that. Since if you know what the flying nun is, right? Go back to that. But yeah, it's all of that nonsense, right? Like it plays with those kind of shorthands, and I look, I enjoy the movies for what they are, but like it just strange, and the undertones of it kind of strange about it, and I never really get into it. But like I really like the first film, like for what it was. It's like, oh, this kind of, they kind of cook with this, and then it played all these like other horror themed ideas that people like Amityville and all of this stuff. Like people like this. I mean, I suppose. But yeah, they know the audience. Like they know the stuff popular. It is make the money that it could make, and yeah, they kind of cook as they say. I never got into the sequel, so La La Rona and all of that bullshit. I think it also plays with that. Look, it have a big Hispanic population in the United States. Like what's like what 15% or 60% of the population is that. That's a lot of people, and they have a whole like framework of entertainment that most people don't get. Like a lot of white people just do like watch what Hispanic people watch. So that's why you could like make some joke on SNL and nobody will get it because it's like, oh, but everybody from Mexico get it. Is that kind of stuff? And
I see what you did there, Ricardo. I know you talk.
yeah, but
Yeah.
that whole media empire, that whole media space is a whole space by itself. Like we live in Trinidad, I get it because I will see television from like Puerto Rico and Mexico and South America. Like I'm familiar with that growing up, because I live in Trinidad. Trinidad still like have a whole Spanish history to it. But like, yeah, these things will just have played as if, oh, this is some new thing or whatever it is, and they play with that, like, because yeah, Hispanics are overwhelmingly Catholic in the United States, and so like I understand why this franchise is as popular as it is, and why it is as big as it is, and why it is impactful it is, and mostly works. So I dig it for what it is. Like it is that, but I just look. I generally do like horror in general, so like I kind of don't care one way or the other. So that's how I just feel about it with respect to this. Yeah, that's it.
Alright, I understand, right? I just love the fact that you say you don't like horror, yet you're part of the show. Whatever.
It's good to have alternate perspectives.
Yeah, of course, of course. So, of course, Michael, seeing that you put the Conjuring films in your second place as far as top 15, and, later on you'll tell me how you feel about this one and if it also fits in your number two as well. Yeah, your history with the franchise up to this point and why you love it so much to actually put it in number two, as your number two, sorry.
Right. Well, for starters, generally speaking, I don't find any horror films scary in recent years. Like, probably the last scary horror film I watched was when I was very young in the 80s or something like that. So from that point of view, I don't judge horror films based on how scary it is or whatnot. And I could understand certain people's perspectives on this particular franchise, um, where some people think it's more scary because it's quote unquote based on a true story. But that shit don't mean nothing to me because it's never really based on a true story, right? It's heavily embellished. What I liked about this franchise, generally speaking, from day one, is the fact that it kind of harkens back to the old school horror filmmaking, like not Rosemary's Baby. What was the other one? The Exorcist. It has a
Yes,
kind of
yes.
Exorcist feel,
Hmm.
right? But with modern visual effects. So whereas if you look back at Exorcist now, back in the day, Exorcist was really scary to audiences, and you look at it now, it's not really that scary visually. But Conjuring was that with visual scares and inventive and creative ways of playing with the fear of the audience. And throughout the main series, and that including the spin-offs, but throughout the main series, they have been relatively consistent in coming up with inventive ways of playing with the fear of the audience and playing with the tropes of horror movies in general, right? Because they know what the audience expects, and they will deliberately do things to make you expect something is going to happen and then subvert the expectations and do it in a different way. And that's what I really appreciate about the series is the amount of creativity that's involved. As not just jump scare, oh look a ghost here, that kind of nonsense. So it kind of reminds me of that kind of old school style of horror film, like the early Nightmare on Elm Street films, right? Which, when you look at it, is in a lot of cases, those films were more comedy than horror, but they were very creative. And that's really what I appreciate most about the Conjuring series and most of the horror films that I like is really, when they could subvert my expectations in a genre that has been so played out that you kind of know what's going to happen every second of the movie and still find ways of, delivering something new. So in every Conjuring movie, there's at least one or two scenes that are so different from anything you've ever seen before that it just takes your breath away. Right? It's not necessarily that it's mind-blowingly scary, but it introduces, elements that you have not necessarily seen done in that way. And that's really, why it plays so high in my list of top horror films because you can't beat the level of creativity in the mainline Conjuring films.
Yeah, no. As I say that with the franchise, right? That scene, that early scene in Conjuring 2, right, where Vera Farmiga's character, right, gosh, Lorraine, right, yeah, when she is picturing, well, sorry, when she is like seeing how this guy, kills his family with a shotgun, right? I was actually like blown away by that moment though. That's the way how it's edited in such a way where she has the gun, but it feels like it jumps up frame a little bit, like when she
Yeah,
fires the shot. I watched, I was like,
that's
holy
really
shit, that look real good, dude. I love that. Yeah.
they always find a way to give you a visual spectacle in a way that it has not really been done in other horror films. So even though, yeah, it might be similar story to things you would see elsewhere and whatnot, they find a creative angle for displaying it, and that's really what I appreciate about it. So you know, when you go to the cinema, you want to feel like you spend your money for something. You don't want to spend your money and go and see a movie and every single step of the movie was predictable and it's just the same thing as every other movie. You know, then we're really going to see. So I appreciate the fact that they always find, even from the technical point of view, in terms of the cinematography and whatnot, they find creative ways of doing the story so that even though the story might be familiar, they find an inventive way of portraying it to the audience. So that's really why I give them high marks.
Right, right, right. So with this review here, folks, we'll keep things spoiler free-ish. That's all you see, right? We may throw in a couple of spoilers here or there, right? But I am more going off of what people said about the film when it dropped back in September, right? Because I was aware of, some reviews of it, right? Even though I didn't watch them in full detail. But, some people, or I should say most people, were kind of like, about it, right? And so far, it's been getting mixed reviews, right? And I understand why, right? But I will be honest, just to kick things off. I think that this show was pretty good. It's not the fireworks exploding extravaganza of a final film that it could have been. Like I was expecting it to be, like just kind of raise the stakes even higher, just sort of similar to like what two did, right? But as far as just like the emotional core of it all, I think that it works. I think that it ends the series off on a really good note, in my opinion, right? For one thing, I like that it returns to the haunted house stuff. And here's the thing, so for me, every time I go into these films, I don't even know about these stories. I know like some people, especially for the States, will go into it and be like, yeah, I remember that. And I saw this one documentary about this thing that happened in the 80s or the 70s. Blah, blah, blah. I just know Amityville, for example. I just know that by name because of the films that came out of it. But I don't know all the details of everything with that, right? It's like this particular story that takes place in 86, I believe it was, right? With let me just get the name, sorry, the Smurl, right? The Smurl family.
Yeah.
I am not familiar with that at all, though. So, yes, even though they will say this is based on a true story, I know that there was a lot and a lot and a lot of embellishment that went into this, right?
Obviously.
Obviously, right? So yeah, I'm not no paranormal nerd, and I can't tell you, well, no, actually this happened and this thing happened, blah blah blah, right? So the way how this show kind of thematically try to connect, why Ed and Lorraine actually got into this whole demonologist stuff in the first place, right? How they tied to this particular case. I don't think it played out like that. I just felt it was done that way because it's the final film, so we had to do it that way. So I do like the intro. It starts off in, I think it's 964, right? Yeah, where Lauren is expecting, and during one of their cases, their early cases, that's when she gets the attack, and she has to the pregnancy that kind of takes place sooner than expected, right? So I like that they connect this particular story to their journey in life and what it is they've been doing from the start, right? One thing I actually do like about this film here is that they actually make the daughter relevant though, because I always felt like in the previous films she was just sort of there in the background, and you kind of understand why she just there kind of living she life, right? But she's not like a part of the whole demonologist business, right? She just sort of just there, right? But in this case, it kind of make her relevant, and again, embellishment. I don't know if she continue on in the legacy, in their traditional legacy, because they set up here in the film that she becomes clairvoyant just like her mom, and I am not even gonna stop to say, well, wait, so how come she had to reach this particular age to become clairvoyant? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I don't know, because I think like so in Conjuring 2, for example, there's a moment where Lorraine tells the girl who lives in the haunted house, yeah, you know what, this is what I found out, I was clairvoyant, and my friends was like kind of looking at me weird, right? So I just always thought like, she was very young when that happened, right? But in this case, the daughter is literally a young woman, and she's about to be engaged and whatnot, so it's like, okay, all of a sudden you have these powers,
Just to Matthew, the daughter actually manifested her abilities when she was a young child.
Okay, I swear to God,
That's
I
why
don't remember.
the nursery rhyme when she was a young child. She was already seeing stuff when she was young.
Oh, so it's from the nursery rhyme, and okay.
Yeah. The
All right.
whole point of the nursery rhyme was Lorraine trying to tell her how to push away the visions and to ignore it because Lorraine didn't want her following in her footsteps.
Oh, okay. I understand because at first, like on surface level, you think it's just coping mechanism for fear, right? Like when she's confronted by fear, some things, or in this case, demons or whatnot, right? I just always thought like it was just sort of like a coping mechanism. I didn't know it was to
But
like
she was
subdue
literally
the
seeing
powers. Okay, I
from
didn't know.
childhood.
Oh, okay. Well, good thing you noticed that though. I did not pick up on that. Wow. All right. Yeah. That that
Yeah,
that
but a
actually
big
makes
part of
sense.
the
That makes
movie. I
sense.
don't know. I said it was a big part of the movie. I don't know how you didn't notice that.
Nah, I don't know. It's just like yes, the nursery rhyme was prevalent throughout the film, right? But I just always thought like it like her clairvoyant powers just suddenly came on. Like it wasn't like it didn't turn more for the show. It's just like I thought that it's just something that just happened at this particular point because of the let's just call it spiritual turmoil the family was going through now. In this case, you
No,
know.
what the story is really trying to tell you is that the daughter always had the ability since she was young, but her mother was trying to teach her how to suppress it. And she reached a point at where this story is now, where she's a young woman, where she could no longer ignore it and she chose to embrace the power. That's really what the story is.
Okay. Also too, I could see that also too in terms of where Ed and Lorraine are at in the film because yeah, they're pretty much retired because they've just been through the ringer one too many times and I like that it builds from the last film where yeah, where Ed suffers a heart attack, right? During one of the cases, right? So yeah, it's like he needs to slow down and whatnot. So I like how it builds from there, right? So in this case, it's like what we just slowing down. We're not getting any younger. Mad props for the actors. This is what they always love about the franchise, right? Like even though the actors themselves, right, Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, are in their late 50s, right? I like that the show always kind of finds ways, like little makeup stuff that to make them look a little bit older than they actually are, right? So like throughout the course of the films, they gradually get older in front of our eyes. So I like that, right? But in terms of Judy, right? That's the daughter's name. I just felt like in her case it was like Lorraine just didn't want more Lorraine than Ed, right? Yeah, just did not want Judy to follow in their footsteps, right? So just so reluctant that Judy eventually kind of helps out in their case, even though they don't want to be a part of it, right? Also like how the Judy's fiance is worked into the story as well, right? Especially the whole proposal scene. I thought that was really that was kind of clever how they do that as well, right? But I like how Tony, that's his name, right? Who's played by Ben Hardy of all people. I was like, oh, that's how he's worked into the story. That was really cool. One criticism that I saw people have with the film, and listener, I kind of understand why in retrospect, and it kind of goes to the issue that people had with the third film, and unfortunately with the film as a whole. Some people felt that the show was kind of lagging, like it just took long with the character beats and the family stuff or what that. I actually don't mind that. I like how they were developing the characters. Well, that's the dynamic between the Warrens and Tony, right? I like how they were building that, right? Yes, there were some down moments of downtime. I'll give the show that, right? And this is a 2 hour and 50 minute movie, right? Yes, but I thought that those moments were important and integral in terms of like just building the conceit of what the story is about. Like yeah, like just emotionally what is happening, right? But yeah, I saw some reviews and people felt that the show was long and boring and didn't get to the scares right away, right? And then now
I
that
agree that this film was a little bit too long. It was probably about a half hour too long.
yeah, you know, I feel like the show's trying to do. It was trying to do like what the Conjuring 2 was, right? Where it was around that same runtime. But Conjuring 2 had a lot more that was going on, right? They didn't waste time
Yeah,
in terms of building the
my
story. This one, they just sort of
problem.
slowed down for a reason. And while I appreciate that,
Yeah,
yes, it did lead to some moments where it's like, yeah, they could shave off some minutes here or there.
yeah. My problem is that this last movie is actually three movies in one. Um, they
Okay,
had a
fine,
lot
so.
of story they could have told, but they didn't need to tell all the story. you know, so if you really look at it, it's really three different stories, three different films happening, and each film actually has a different tone. So you have the typical Conjuring film, which is the story with the Smurfs being haunted by these demons. You have the story of Ed and Lorraine aging and dealing with the whole retirement and getting out of the business, but not wanting their daughter to get involved in it. And then you have an origin story of the daughter and the fiance becoming the new Ed and Lorraine, right? So it's three totally different films, but they try to work all of them into each other. And that's why there's some moments that don't play as well as others because it's not a movie you come to see. You understand? So that's really my issue with the film. I mean, overall, it's a good movie, right? But just I think they tried to do a little bit too much in one movie.
Yeah, I understand. I do agree with you for the most part, right? Another issue people have, and again, well, this goes back to the franchise now, is they didn't find it was that scary, right? Um, and here's the thing, like, compared to you, Michael, right? There are some
Mm-hmm.
horror movies that, like, they wouldn't keep me up at night, right? But there are
Yeah.
moments, there are some films that have moments that really do unsettle me, right? And those are the films that I try to work into my top 10 list, right? But when it comes to The Conjuring, to be honest, there is a formula. It's a haunted house formula, and I think that it
Yeah.
works for the films that they are based around, right? So it's
Yep.
kind of interesting now that, especially with these two films that are not directed by James Wan, right? Where fans of the first two films could come out and say, it's not that scary, I didn't find it to be scary at all, and all that kind of stuff, right? I mean,
Though.
for me, right? Like I would say, like with this film last, right? There was there was there
Wrong,
were
man.
there were a few moments though where I was like, ugh, like this one,
Wrong, Matthew. Even though I
uh,
don't find any horror films to be truly scary, I
right,
could still appreciate when a film does it right.
agreed,
Right?
yes,
So I know what would scare other people, and I have to say that this particular film was not really that scary on Conjuring levels.
right,
Right? Just comparing it to itself in the whole franchise, it is not really that scary, right? Even when the small family is being haunted by the demons, those demons, there was some scary moments, but generally speaking, compared to what we would typically see in a Conjuring film, they were not that scary.
yeah. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from, right? There's a scene involving projectile vomit though, that literally had me like, oh god, like I literally squirm at that. I literally squirm at that. I swear to God, right?
Scene worthy of a Final Destination movie.
Yeah. Indeed, right? And then the whole thing with the mirror, like I didn't like. All right, so again, I don't know the case, right? So I didn't know that it was built around this mirror and like how they work it in thematically. I guess works for the most part, right? But yes, I understand with Conjuring fans not finding this one to be particularly scary, right? But how I just treat these films, believe it or not, right? Especially these last two films, right? Is that because I am not familiar with the actual case at all, I am there thinking that some, if not all, of what happened. All right, let me just say some, if not the entirety of what happens in these films are based on what really did go down, right? So things may not play out the way I want them to in my head, right? But I am just treated as okay. Well, the show is trying to kind of give you bits of the details that went down with the actual case, but then they add more things on top of it to entertain the audience. So, okay, so like I felt like with this one in particular, it was trying to do that, right? Where yes, there would not be the expected scares or whatnot, right? But it's still trying to stick with the story that actually took place. That's how I see this film in particular, right? Right? Just like the other films as well, right? But yes, admittedly, it was not as scary as all that, right? But then that goes back to what it is I say about this show being the final one. I felt like similar to two, they could have gone bigger. They could have had, it could have been more of an extravaganza, right? But not too much to the point of just being absurdly insane and crazy and whatnot, right? Like I'm not expecting that with this, right? I do like that it is still holding on to its emotional center. I do like that even in the climax. But yes, the scares could have been bigger, man. You know what I mean? Now I will say that compared to the last one, this is marginally it is a marginal improvement from the last one. I speaking in terms of like the director himself, right? I felt like with that
Yeah,
last film there wasn't really much going on, even though the concept was very intriguing. This one there's a lot more that goes on. I felt like, Michael was just able to do a lot more visually and thematically with the story and whatnot. I do like, the little montage with when the media, starts going into the Smurl family. I like the Larry King life segment. That was really cool as well. And there was no deepfake Larry King, sorry, just get a guy to make him look like him. That was really cool. I like those moments. That was really cool, right? Similar to like what they did in the second one, right? With the montage with the news people coming in, right? So in a way, I see Conjuring 2 as Michael Chavez's Conjuring 2. Sorry, Last Rites is his version of Conjuring 2. That's what I was like where the story
as
is
a team
bigger and you see.
version.
Sorry.
As a team version.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I don't know, like for me at the end of the day, there was something about when James Wan was was sitting in the director's seat though, director's chair, sorry. It was what he brought to the table, Drake. Okay, you could tell that this man know a lot about scares, especially building of tension. That's what the man does so well.
Exactly.
Like Michael, all right, to his credit, the man have an eye for great visuals. Like with, I actually do like the cinematography in both The Devil Made Me Do It and this one here, right? It has a certain like style to it, like a certain brightness that I actually do like, right? It's
Yeah.
meant to be a little bit different compared to the first two, right? You know, but I just felt like in
I have
terms
no
of building
problem.
tension, he just I
I
don't
have no
know, boy, he
problems
just
with
need to
that.
work at that though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have no problems with the change in the aesthetic. That's fine. Um, there there are lots of nice things they've done with the cinematography in this film in terms of the mirror motif throughout the film. Because there are lots of shots in the film that is not ghost haunting or anything related. Might just be two characters talking, but we see in one of them in a reflection in a mirror, right? The perspectives always kind of lingers on mirrors, generally speaking, throughout the film, right? So there were some interesting things that were done stylistically from that point of view. My issue, as I said, is just the fact that the story wasn't as focused as it could have been because they were trying to tell multiple stories and not each story is as strong as it should have been for a Conjuring film, right? This could have easily been split into two separate films, and I think they would have been much more on point in terms of what the audience expects. But again, corporate decisions in terms of what they want to do with the franchise and moving forward might have influenced how this film was made. Um, yeah, but in terms of the technical aspects of it, it had all the right elements. It just wasn't seasoned properly. Let me put it that way.
I understand, right? So that's just a couple more things and then we wrap up, right? Just thematically, I like the whole idea of, the Warrens fighting off the mirror and, just like and how, it reworks the same nursery rhyme from before. That was a nice moment as well, too. As far as the demons themselves, like, as usual, you're given like little bits of info as far as who they are and whatnot. But I don't know, I felt like in this case, we could have gotten a little bit more, especially with that one guy with the axe and then this one demon chick that seems to be following Judy along, right?
Yeah, they were very generic demons,
Mm.
I have to say.
Yeah.
Even down to the visuals of the demons themselves were very generic.
Yeah,
It's like
like the makeup on their
the
faces look
cartoon
like
as demons.
they look like typical 2010s,
Yeah,
2020s
yeah.
demon makeup there. You know what I mean? If you understand what I'm saying.
That was the letdown for me in terms of the visuals. Everything else visually was great, but the design and the makeup of the demons just it feel real cheap. It's like it was almost like an afterthought. Like,
Yeah.
they didn't originally plan to show the demons. And then at some point somebody look at it and say, hey, no, we need to actually show the demon in a couple of scenes. And they went back and just do it. That's what it feels like. It feels like they weren't really designed to be scary demons. And that, I mean, even though the demons themselves weren't really a huge part of the story when you look at it, because in this story, it technically has four demons, right? It have the three in the mirror, but they were being puppeted by the main demon. Who really cares, right? Whether it's one demon or four demons, We don't really care. Just give us a scary looking demon. But all of them felt so generic that, it kind of dropped the ball in terms of what could have been much more interesting character designs for those demons.
Yeah, and while I will give the show credit again, going back to Conjuring 2, of doing the whole, well, this demon is supposed to like manifest its way in different ways in front of different people. So like Lorraine was seeing the nun in part 2 in a sorry, like the same demon that was attacking the family. Lorraine was seeing it as a nun, so they kind of do that, but then that leads to something that for me, because I am not the biggest fan of the Conjuring universe, it didn't take me out of the show, but I felt it was kind of unnecessary when you think about it. Yeah, Annabelle though, like, was there a need for this doll to
The
be there?
cameos of Annabelle for the
Yeah.
film,
Now, I
right?
know, but like, I understand is the end, but there was no need for Annabelle to be. The show was like, what's the point? Like, okay,
Yeah.
like they frame it as Judy was scared of it, right? And they kind of hinted it in the first film too, which I understand, I get, but like, nah, they could have fit. All right, I'll put it like this, right? I know it's probably no, not too late. Probably because it's a universe and it's the Conjuring Universe 1 and it's Warner Brothers, so they can invent whatever shit they want to and make a spin off, right? They can actually
Mhm.
incorporate a brand new character and then give it a spin-off film. It's like how part 2 introduced the nun, first one
Yeah.
introduced Annabelle. This one they could have introduced a brand new character, but it's like, no, well, people love Annabelle, so let's just show Annabelle one
Right.
last
And
time. But like, well,
that's
why
true.
though?
That's true. That's true about the design of the demons, because the only recognizable demon character in the film is Annabelle, who we already know, right? We have multiple films with her, so we don't need to see her. So if you're gonna be using new demons in the movie, make them visually interesting and unique, right? Like one of these scenes in this film that really took me out of the film. And normally when I watch in a horror film, I really engrossed in it. You see that there's an early scene where one of the children was playing with a doll, and the doll disappeared, and she went looking for the doll and found it in another room. And the doll, and I think it's in one of the trailers actually, the doll rolled over and then sit up
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
started floating up in the air,
Hmm.
right? I was going with that, right? Until the moment where they actually show the demon holding the door like it playing peekaboo. I was like, what nonsense is that?
Oh,
That is
I know that moment. Yep, I remember. Hmm.
you know it's like it was going good, it was building tension, and it was relatively early in the film, so I don't even expect to see the demon that early in the film. You show me the demon and then you let me down. I was like, what shit is that? You understand? So that's what I'm saying. They could have done a little bit more in terms of the design of the characters, demon characters for this film, to at least make them something memorable, right? Because they were so generic, they were so fake looking that it took me out of the movie for a second. I was like, what's the point of that?
Wow, well, I actually surprised that you were taken aback by that moment. 'Cause I saw it, I was just like, oh well, okay, they revealed that a little too early. Well, okay, all right.
It was what the character actually looked like. It just looked like somebody wearing some makeup that cosplaying as a ghost,
Hmm.
right? It didn't feel like a demon. That was the point I was making, because I'm expecting, you're building up a moment here, is a moment of tension. I'm expecting that if you do decide to show the demon, that at least it's going to be something that I'm not expecting visually, that's going to look different. It's going to be unique from all the other characters we've seen in this universe before. But you just give me some kind of wash down last minute nonsense. And that is why it took me out of the film.
Right, right. So that's a couple more things, right? So I do like the ending as well. Yeah, I mean with all the flaws with the show, right? I do like how emotional the ending is. Not overly sentimental, but that's the idea that our characters survive, and I like the idea. I like where Laurie was talking about, she had a vision that they got older and they traveled to places and they wrote a book that wasn't really all that good. I really should look up and see what that actual book is. 'Cause I know they put out something
Yeah, they did put
literally,
out a
but I
book.
don't know. Again, I'm not familiar with their lives, so like I don't know. But I know they put out some, right? I do like the
Yeah.
little info at the end with, especially with what happened with Ed though, with him passing away at 74, and
Yeah.
how Lorraine had to take care of him because he had a
Phantom
stroke and
Menace
whatnot.
79.
79, right? 'Cause
He,
he had the
he had a
stroke in
stroke at
74.
74 and
Yeah,
passed away 5 years later.
yeah. And I didn't know that she lived till like 92, boy, and she never remarried. But I
Yeah.
was like, wow, that is commitment, boy. That's commitment. I wish we had gotten a little bit more info in terms of what happened to Judy and her husband now. But do you really? Sorry, Tony. Yeah. We don't really get that. And I do like if you stuck around for the very end. After all the credits roll, the whole idea of the how they kept the mirror and they call it a conjuring. I think what they call it a conjuring mirror or something like that. But the idea that, oh, this is where the franchise got the term Conjuring from. It's like, oh, okay, I like that. And then
Yeah,
of course they play
that's the
the
origin part of the story that I was talking about, where basically they're trying to make a origin story, but the origin story is not for Ed and Lorraine. So I don't know if this is what they're going to do, but it feels like what they're going to do is to have future movies that not called The Conjuring, that's going to be led by the daughter and her husband, because that's literally what they did. They passed the baton to the two of them, right? They basically carbon copies of Ed and Lorraine. And I think part of the reason they're doing that is so that now they could fictionalize more of the story and they don't have to follow the actual quote unquote true story of Ed and Lorraine and their particular their particular cases. So I think that's where they're going with that. There's also the theory that part of the reason why they called this one the final one is because the actual artifacts in real life are now owned by Matt Rife, the comedian. He bought the stuff and he has it, I think, for the next 5 years or 10 years or something like that. So they actually, if they have to do any other films with these characters, they actually had to pay him because he owns the artifacts now, right? So I think it's kind of a waiting game to put in a pause. Let's see how things work out, and then we could always decide if we're coming back to using these artifacts or if we're gonna spin off with something completely fictional. I think that's really what that whole setup was for in terms of the daughter and the husband.
All right, well, now all that making sense, Shay, because yeah, just to get to my last point, I was reading up on Wikipedia, I should say, yeah, they teasing at the possibility of doing prequels, right? Because technically that's kind of like what the intro to this film was, right? The whole 964 stuff and the birth of Judy,
Yep.
right? Yeah, let's show the early adventures of Ed and Lorraine, right? Let's do that. And also I should mention mad points for getting the two actors who play the younger versions of themselves from because they were in the third film. If I'm not mistaken, they were in the third film. They were in a couple of flashbacks, so I think it's them who show up in the beginning here. I was like, all right, that's clever, you know. So here's the thing, I because it's Warner Brothers, I could definitely see prequel films coming out of this more than we're gonna see Tony and Judy or the adventures of Tony and Judy because again I don't know the real world stuff, so I should look up and see what really happened to Tony and Judy, right? Um, if they are involved in the paranormal at all in that capacity, I don't know. I should really look that up, right? But I could certainly see the early adventures of Ed and Lorraine going forward because yeah, I think that Patrick and Vera, who have been great across the board with this franchise, right? Yeah, I don't think I mean 4 films is enough for them. I do see them coming back to do a next one unless there's a cameo and wanna shell out some money for them to make a little, to show the face in a film or two. I don't know. But yeah, I could definitely see prequel films out of this, right? But the sequel stuff could happen as well, right? But then that kind of brings up the whole idea that but all right, well, so you're closing off this chapter of the Conjuring universe, but it's Warner Brothers, so of course they're gonna let this thing continue on in some way, shape, or form. So now that you mentioned that this comedian have the artifacts, then we can't really do any more of the demon spin-off films. So the only option is the
Well,
prequel stuff
they
or the sequel
could
stuff.
do it,
Oh, they could.
they
Okay.
could do it, but it's just that they may not necessarily want to pay Matt Rife, right? Because the original estate that they had the arrangement with is no longer the owners of the artifacts, right? So it's not that they can't do it. They could if they want to, but they're probably going to wait because if he only has the ownership for 5 years or whatever, I can't remember what's the exact number, but I think it's like 5 years. So if he only has the ownership for 5 years, then it's easy for them to wait 5 years before they do a next one, right? And again, they could now choose to either go with the children, Judy and Tony, and do completely fictional stories, which people, let's be honest, nobody really cares if it's based on a true story or not, right? As long as it's a good film. So they could do that. Or they also have the option of doing the prequels, where they could use the young versions of Ed and Lorraine and flashback between them and the older versions, right? Because even in terms of when they said both people died, is a lot of years after the events of this story. So it's very easy for them to still have them in flashbacks. They might not be active on cases, but they could do a back and forth flashing between the young version and the old version. So it have ways for them to do it moving forward. But I think they're just gonna put it on pause for a couple of years and see how things shake out. And also because then Warner Brothers in a state of turmoil still, they're looking to sell and all kind of drama things. So yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. So for me, that's a get a written. I'll still give this a light 3 out of 5. It's aight. It's aight for what it is, right? It's a step up from I think personally it is a step up from The Devil Made Me Do It. I would give that one a strong 2.5 out of 5. See it if you want to. But yeah, this one is a slight improvement over this one, man. But again, it's just not the I think that this could have been a bigger send off to the sorry, not the franchise, or I should say this section of the Conjuring universe, man. I think that they could have gone bigger and bolder and really end the show off on a high note, man. They could have done that. They really could have done that, right?
Yep.
But I mean, Patrick and Vera still shine. The cast are fine. Story is okay for what it is, though. But again, they could have gone bigger. They really could have. They really could have stepped things up, especially from how The Devil Made Me Do It was, right? There was no excuse. They really could have gone bigger with this one, and they kind of went bigger, but more on the technical side of things. But I just felt they could have gone bigger thematically, emotionally, and of course, just viscerally in terms of the scares and the tension, right? But overall, though, as far as the franchise goes, I do see this film being like being a requirement as far as Halloween viewing and whatnot, right? I do see screenings of this over time. I do see people marathoning this for years to come, man. Because there's a lot to enjoy in this franchise here, right? And yeah, like
Yeah.
many a franchise, with the rare exception, I would say being Final Destination. I totally agree with you on that. Yeah, you will have the highs, but then as the series go on, there will be the lows, right? But if you're a fan, you will still like and you just really want to take in a little something for the Halloween, and you just want to marathon something. Yeah, I could see people running through all 4 of these films, right? I mean, God forbid, or I should say, yeah, God forbid for those who wanna like watch the entire Conjuring universe films, and even worse, if they want to do it in chronological order too. I'll be like,
No,
hey,
don't do
listen,
that.
good luck
Don't do
to
that.
y'all.
That's torture.
Good luck to y'all. Y'all have fun. Y'all have fun. That gonna take all the 2 days. I don't think it'll take a day, because halfway in between the binging, I'll just get tired and be like, Huss, why am I watching the Nun? Why am I watching the Nun? Why am I watching La Llorona 4? Why am I watching this?
I think
Let me just jump
the
to
only spin-off
to
that was
Conjuring 3 now,
genuinely good was Annabelle Creation, and that's because it was Andy Samberg.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Like I say, I saw that twice in cinema. I really, really
Yeah,
enjoyed that
that was
film,
the
right?
only one genuinely good.
Yeah.
The rest of them, like cash grabs.
That is true. But one day I could see myself watching those films, but it will not be in a marathon. It will not be in a Conjuring universe marathon at all. If I had a marathon something, it will be the Conjuring films, and I'll just leave it at that, right? But
Yeah.
it's still amazing that this show is, should say this franchise is beloved, right? To the point that even though this film last, right, got mixed reviews, it still made bank, and it still made Warner Brothers a lot of money, right? These films make a lot of money, right? So of course, yeah, it's to be expected. There's gonna be another entry in the Conjuring universe one day. It's just a matter of what it will be, right? It may not be a spin-off, but it may be a prequel or a sequel to the original Conjuring stuff, right? So I guess time will tell, right? But yeah, I would say this Conjuring section of the universe itself, of the Conjuring universe, sorry, has longevity. I could see people going back to this for years to come, man, right? But for me personally, I think that the first 2 are the best. I think that James Wan is the reason why they are the best, is just because of what he brought to the table in terms of just his knowledge in terms of just horror filmmaking and storytelling, right? I think that he really brings those 2 elements to the table, and that's why those first 2 films really work for me, right? Michael Chavez, I'm not gonna knock the man for The Devil Made Me Do It, or Last Right, and I'm gonna see that he's a terrible director because he made those two films and some of the other spin-off films. I think that the man, like, listen, wanna trust the man to make these films, and he do his job, right? So I can't be mad at him for
The
that, right?
man did the best he could. Okay, let's put it that way. He did
Yeah,
the best he
he
could.
did the best he could. Even with this film, he did the best he could. It's just
Yeah.
the story. Just they could have
He's
punched
not
the story
the
up.
one, but he did what he could with what he had.
Yeah, and I do want to see him do more outside of the Conjuring universe, because it's really funny that all the films that I'm seeing on Wikipedia that he did, or I should say a majority of them, is stuff that's in the Conjuring universe. It's like, wow, but like this is literally your bread and butter, Dread. So I don't know, like and listen, I want to see the man step out of it one day, and I will actually look out to see what it is he does, especially if it's a horror. I will look out and I will tune in, and I want to see the man really, step out of his Conjuring comfort zone, if you will, right? And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. But yeah, Last Rites is okay for what it is, right? But I would say, seeing that it's now out on digital, you could more than definitely just, pick a day, maybe on Halloween itself, and just binge all four of these films, right? But again, if you just want to run through the entire Conjuring universe of films, yeah, much props to you. Good luck to you. You are a brave soul. You do your thing, right? And that's all I have to
Yeah,
say.
rather than running a marathon with the full Conjuring universe, I would say watch the four Conjuring films. Three you could skip, but if you really have to, watch the four Conjuring films. And after watching Last Rites, you could probably go back and watch. There are two horror films, Mirrors 1 and 2, that kind of do the whole mirror demon thing much better than Last Rites.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, man, your final thoughts and rating on Last Rites, and you agree with me if, as far as the franchise being, something that's going to be a staple of Halloween time viewing.
Yeah, definitely. The franchise is going to forever remain in horror film history as a whole. The individual film, this film, it's not terrible. It's not the worst, but it's very far from the best. Right? I think it's worth a watch. Especially as you say, it's out on digital. It was okay. It was decent. I can see what they tried to do, and it was enjoyable. Just not as focused as it probably could have been. So I could still see, other films coming out that could improve on the mistakes of this film and get the Conjuring universe back in form. Probably not with the same director, but we'll see. I mean, it's easy enough to change directors and try something new, but as long as they kind of stick to the formula of what made, especially the first two Conjuring films work, I think they'll be on solid footing. And that's probably the biggest issue is once they have deviated from the quote unquote formula, they have run into problems. So once they kind of stick to that formula, I think it really has a lot of longevity and it could go, probably into 10, 12 different films down the line. Who knows?
Right. So, Ricardo, because I really want to exclude you out again from this chat here. But yeah, as we wrap up here, I know you didn't see this one here or the last one or care to. Just based on our thoughts on what it is we said there. I'll leave it up to you whether you want to see them, whether it's out of curiosity or just to say you saw them, right? But yeah,
right. I might make the effort.
Yeah, but what I will ask you now is, seeing that this Conjuring's section, as I say, is done now, what do you think of, what do you think its legacy is going to be as far as like Halloween time viewing, and where do you see this big elongated Conjuring universe going forward now, seeing that, the Conjuring itself has wrapped up, in quotes?
It boils down to where, who in charge now and what the vision is, the material. I have no idea. I mean, I really don't know where they're gonna go with it as it is. So I mean, I can't know what it is. Yeah, I think you only talk about it, but is a new guy who bought it out and he own all of the material, but like it's the studio and the whole back and forth. So I have no clue what they're gonna do with it as it is.